Alright guys, welcome back to part 2 of our Firebase real-time chat application series. In the last video, we did some basic project setup, and in today's video, we are going to be setting up the UI for the login and register screens. So before we get started, select the simulator up here in your project, and just hit Command R to build and run. Make sure that you are getting your application here. And looks like we have this other simulator selected, which is okay. We can close up this one and we see our app is empty, but is in fact loading here. So the first thing we want to do is essentially figure out if the user is signed in or not. And if they're not signed in, we want to show the login screen and then also have a button for the user to create an account should they be a new user. So if you recall from the last video, we did create a bunch of these view controllers, which are empty for now, but we have this login and register view controller. So I'm going to select both of these and select new group from selection. And we're just going to put them in a folder called login. And let's actually call this login register. And it looks like I can't use slashes, so just kidding. Let's just call it login. And let's head on over to the conversation view controller, and I like to use this Command Shift O window to search the project. Reason being is just a habit, I guess. And what we want to do in this controller, because it's the controller that initially gets loaded when we launch up our application, for now, what we are going to do is check if the user is signed in based on some user defaults, and if they are, we'll stay on the screen, and if they're not, we'll show the login screen. So let's set the background color of this just so we can visually disambiguate what screen we're on. And let's override view did appear. So call super view did appear. And like I mentioned, we want to basically get the value of some user defaults. And user defaults, if you're not familiar, are used to save some data about anything you want to really save to disk. And the key we're going to use is logged in. You can use any key. This is totally up to you. So we're going to say if the user is not logged in, we want to present the login view controller. And let's see. This is complaining. Let's see, we did bool for key, and that's because we call this value. So let's actually call this is logged in to be more indicative. And we have our login view controller, so what we'll simply do in here is say let vc equals login view controller. And let's see, what else do we want to do? We are going to create a navigation controller that this VC gets plugged into, and a navigation controller can have a root view controller like so, and we're going to present this navigation controller with an animation. And the other thing you want to do is on this nav object, which is a nav controller, we want to say modal presentation style, and we want to assign it to be full screen. And the reason we want to do this is in iOS 13, if you don't specify it this way, the controller by default pops up as a card, and the user can dismiss it by swiping down. And we don't want the user to be able to dismiss the register login page unless they're actually truly logged in. So if you hit Command R to build and run, you'll notice that we launch to that red screen and we get this screen pop up. We have the nav controller here. We don't have any background color on the login view controller. So let's come in here and let's set a background color here, and let's call it white. Let's get rid of all this commented out code. Let's do the same thing in here. And let's set the background color in here to something different just so we can discern the two. And we'll call this one, let's say, let's do link, because it's a nicer blue. And let's also in the login view controller, we also are going to say title is login. So hit Command R to build and run one more time, and you'll see the red screen appears, and right away we get this navigation controller popping up with login as the navbar title, and our view controller's background is white. So another thing we're going to quickly adjust is if we go back to the conversation view controller, let's change the animation of the presentation to be false. That way the delay between the red screen and our login register will be less, so you won't essentially see that animation, which is more synonymous of what we want to create. So now that we have the login view controller showing up, we also want to add a button up here that lets the user register. So we're going to do that in the login view controller. So first things first, in here we're going to say navigation item dot right bar button item is going to equal a UI bar button item. And we're going to open up the parentheses for the constructor, and we want to construct it with a title, and this is going to be register. The style, we can use done. The target will be self, and we're going to create this selector that we're going to put here in just a second, but the selector will be did tap register. So grab this did tap register and create a function with that name, prefix it Objective-C. This will be a private function, which basically means that it's private to this class. And essentially, once the user taps his button, we want to push the register view controller onto the screen. So we're going to say let VC is the register view controller, and we're going to say VC.title is going to be create account, and we're going to say navigation controller push view controller VC animated true. So go ahead and hit Command R after you've set that up, and you'll now see that there is a register button here, and when we select it, we have this cool animation in which this blue view controller, which is the register controller here, gets pushed onto the screen. So cool, making progress. Now we actually need to design the UI and add our fields and some text field validation. So let's get started with the login screen. So I think it would be nice to add like an image up here of our app, some logo or whatnot. So what I went ahead and did is I just grabbed the Facebook Messenger logo from Google Images. So let's bring this into our project by going to our XE assets and creating a new image set. And we are going to call this logo and drag that image in and drop it into the 1x. And don't worry about the 2 and 3 for now. Once all of this stuff is set up and working, we will go ahead and take care of all of this and retina display and all that jazz. So let's go back to the login view controller and let's create the UI, rather the subviews that we need to get this working. So like I mentioned, we want to show a logo at the top, so we're going to show that in a image view. So let's call this image view, and it'll be a UI image view, and in this we can say image view is a UI image view, and we're going to end up returning that image view. Let's say image view dot image is going to be a UI image, and it's going to be named that image set we just created, so logo. And we also want to say image view dot content mode, and we want this to be scale aspect fit, like so. Now in view did load, we want to add our subviews, so let's do that here. So we want to say view, add subview, image view, and we also want to override view did layout subviews and call super view did layout subviews in here. And essentially in here we can give the frame for our image view. So we can say image view dot frame equals a CG rect with a X, Y, width, and height. So let's put these on new lines. And let's say the size is going to be view.frame.size.width divided by 3. So because we know this is going to be a square, we can put the size in here. The y, we can, let's say, be 20 from the top. The x is going to be view.frame.size.width minus the size, and this whole thing divided by 2, which will center our image view. Now, let's hit Command R to build and run to just see what this looks like. And then what we're also going to do is add some helper functions so we don't have to do this verbose view.frame.size.width every single time we want to get the sizing. So we see the logo is exactly where we'd like it to be, but let's improve this a little bit. So go ahead and open up your resources folder and create a new file. And this time select a Swift file and go ahead and call this extensions.swift. And what we're going to do here is first import UIKit. And because we're going to do most of the user interface designing in code, it's going to get very repetitive to type out things like view.frame.size. Whatever we want. So we're going to create some properties to shorthand this. And we're going to do that by adding an extension onto the UI view base class. And we are going to add a few things. So the first thing is going to be a width property. And this is going to return self.frame.size.width. And let's actually copy and paste this. We want 4 properties. The next one is going to be height, and we want to return the current item's height. We also want top, so the top is going to be the frame.origin.y. We want the bottom, which is going to be the height plus self.frame.origin.y. And while we're at it, I guess, let's add 2 more. We want left, and we also want right. So the left of the frame will be the origin x, and the right of the frame will be the width of the element plus the origin x. So now that we've defined these properties here, we can go back to that login view controller, and we can simplify this code a little bit for the layout. So we can simply say the size is going to be view.width over 2, and we'll see why this isn't working in just a second. And the reason it's not working actually is because this should be view, and you'll see it's view.width. And for this, we can simply say again, view.width, subtracting size over 2, and it just reduces the verbosity of the code we have to type. So if you hit Command R and build and run again, you'll see the image here looks exactly the same, but we can get rid of some boilerplate code. The other thing we want to do, if we think about this a little bit, is right now we're adding this image view to the view controller's view. And once we start adding an email field and a password field and a login button, and we're also going to be covering logging in with Facebook and Google, on smaller devices, we might get into a case where we're either off the screen with our elements or our keyboard is overlapping the text fields. So a good idea is to wrap all of these subviews in a container view that can scroll. So that could be a stack view, or in our case, we're going to use a typical UI scroll view. So go ahead and create a few more user elements here, user interface elements. So the first one is going to be a scroll view as follows. And in here, let's create a scroll view like so. And go ahead and return that scroll view. We're also going to say scroll view.clips2bounds is true. So that's our container. So as I kind of briefly mentioned, we want 2 fields and a button to log in. So the next one is going to be email field. It's a UI text field. And We're going to create a field in here like so. We are going to return the field. We're going to say field.auto capitalization type is none. We're also going to say field.auto correction type is no. And let's see, what else do we want to do in here? We also want to say field.return key type is continue. So when the user hits the return key on the keyboard, we want them to now be in the password field. So the default is the return key. And what else do we want? Let's give this field a nice looking border. So we're going to say, first of all, the corner radius, which is the rounded corner, is going to be 12 pixels. And we're going to say the border width is going to be 1 pixel. We're going to say the border color is going to be UIKolor.lightgray.cg color. We're also going to give the field a placeholder text for email address, like so. And what else do we want? So another thing that we want to do with any text fields we add is add some buffer to the left of the field. And let me actually first put this on our view controller's view so you guys can see it before I describe the issue we need to solve. So first and foremost, let's add that scroll view. And we're going to add our elements into the scroll view. So like that. And the email field. And now in here, we can simply say the scroll views frame is the entirety of the screen, like so. And we're going to use the width of the scroll view, which is actually the same as the view, but just for the sake of readability, we'll use that. And we also want to add the email field now. So let's be lazy and just grab all this and say email field. The X for the email field will be 30 pixels. The Y will be 10 below the image view. So here we can use those cool extensions we made. So image view.bottom plus 10. The width can be the scroll view.width minus 60. And the height of a text field, generally the accepted height standard is 52. So let's do that, and let's hit Command R to build and run and see what we get. So now we have our image view here, and we also have our text field here. We can tap on it, and our keyboard pops up like so. Let's get rid of that. And as we begin typing, you can see the text pop up. So an issue you might see here already is that the text is flush with the left side of the field. A, it looks kind of ugly, and B, it's something that Apple should just default to be correct, but we do need to address it. So the way we address it is fairly simple. We need to leverage a left view. So we can say field.leftView is a UI view. And we're just going to create a view that has some buffer room. So the X is 0, Y is 0, width, let's say, is 5, height is 0. And we also want to say field.leftViewMode is always. And the last thing we're going to do in here is say field.backgroundColor is white. So by default, it's actually clear. It looked white on the simulator because the view controller's background view itself is white. So now that this is good to go, let's just copy and paste the whole thing for our password field and rename this to be password field. We can leave all of this the same with the exception of changing this to be password. And we also want to show the asterisk when we type, so instead of the text itself. So we're going to say is secure text entry, so true. And we want to come down here and also add this as a subview. So add in that password field. And we also want to lay it out, so let's copy this. You can highlight all this and hit Control-I, and it will fix the indentation. Change this to be password field. And instead of this being 10 from the bottom of the image view. We want the password field to be 10 from the bottom of the email field. So go ahead and hit Command R to build and run, and let's see if we're in business. All right, cool. So we have our image view, we have our email field that we can type in email into, and we also have our password field, which shows our asterisk password. So now we need to add a button. So let's go ahead and add the button. And before we add the button, actually, for this password field, let's change the return key type. Instead of it being continue, let's make it done. Since once the user is done in the password field, we should just prompt them to automatically log in once they hit the return key. So let's create a pretty simple button here. So we're going to say private let login button is a UI button, and it'll be a UI button here. We're going to give it a frame later on, so actually let me just get rid of this, and we're going to return the button at the bottom. We're going to say the button's title is going to be login for the normal case. We are also going to set a background color of link, which is a nice blue color, as you've seen already. We are also going to set the title color to be white, like so. And we're also going to give this a rounded corner. So corner radius, we're going to say again is 12. I personally really like the rounded corners on objects. They look sharper to me in terms of just looking nicer. We're going to also mask to bounds, which essentially just cuts off anything that overflows those layer corners. And I also am going to bold the font of the title. So we're going to say this equals system font, and the size is going to be 20, and the weight is going to be bold. So let's add this to our scroll view again as a sub view, and we want to lay this out. So again, let's be lazy and copy and paste this. Grab the scroll view, or rather grab the button, paste that there, and we can keep the width and X the same. The difference is for the Y, we want this to now be 10 below the password field. So go ahead and hit Command R, and we should have our login screen basically laid out as you see here. And this is entirely a coincidence, but the logo here and this match up pretty nicely. So they look like they were designed for each other. So awesome. So now we can focus on some text field validation for this login field, login form rather. We're not going to actually log anyone in, of course. We will be doing that in follow-up videos. And then we're also going to go and create the form for the registration screen. So for the field validation on the login screen, what we want to do is after the user taps the button or hits return after typing their password, we want to validate everything before trying to actually log in. So a good idea would be to create a function that gets called to try to log in. So let's call this login button tapped. And let's do some validation in here. So the first thing we want to check is if there is text in both of the fields and ensure the text is not empty. So we're going to say guard let email equals email field.text. And we're going to say let password equals password field.text. And we're also going to validate that the email string is not empty and that the password string is not empty as well. If any of these cases are not correct, we're going to return out of this, like so. And we also probably want to tell the user you need to enter all the information in before trying to log in. So let's create a function called alert user login error, and let's call this in here. And if all the text does indeed exist, we can continue. The other bit of validation that I will add in here is to ensure that the password that the user is using is at least 6 characters long. And we're going to enforce that in the create account workflow when the user signs up. So we're going to say password.count is greater than or equal to 6. And if it's basically anything less than this, then it'll also break, because we have designed our system to ensure that the password is at least 6 characters long. So in this function, we want to show the user an alert. So we're going to create a alert controller as follows. So call this alert, and we're going to say this is whoops, and the message will be, please enter all information to log in, and the style will be an alert. And now we simply want to show the alert itself. So we can say present alert animated true. And we also want to add an action for the user to dismiss the alert. So we're going to say add action. It'll be a UI alert action as follows. Title of the action will be dismiss. And the style will be cancel. Handler will be nil. So now this should be good to go. Let's get rid of those line breaks. Here we're going to actually implement the login. So Firebase login, and that'll be a separate video of its own, like I mentioned. The other thing we want to do is, of course, add a target to this button. So once the user taps it, what should happen? So we'll say this, add target, self action is did tap login button as follows. Did tap, could have swore I called the did tap login button. Let's see, alert view, login button tapped. Okay, let's copy this, put that there, and the interaction type is touch up inside. And additionally, what we want to do to make our login form nicer is leverage the text field delegate. So when the user hits return, it can go between the fields itself, the focus, and once the user hits return on the password fields, it automatically calls this login function. So it's pretty simple to do that. We are simply going to say email field.delegate is self, and password field.delegate is self. And we want this controller to conform to this delegate, or we'll get these errors that you see here. So I'm going to go to the very bottom, and we're going to create an extension on this controller. So we're going to say extension login view controller and conform to the UI text field delegate. So extensions are really great ways to separate out code. You could in fact conform to the delegate up here at the very top, but then you have to put all the code in the same block, so it gets a little messy. Let's see, what do we have going on over here? This is yelling at us because we should probably put func in here. Then this error will go away. And in the text field delegate, the function we care about is should return, and we want to return true in here. And this function gets called when the user hits the return key, whether it's a continue button or a go button or whatever. So what we want to first do in here is say if the text field is the email field, we want the password field to now be focused. So we're going to say password field become first responder. And else if the text field is the password field already, we want to call the login function. That way the user doesn't have to hit the login button explicitly to continue. So that should be the extent of the validation that we can do in this video. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy a bunch of this stuff, and we're going to paste this into the register screen. Let's actually copy the entirety of the code in here with the exception of this class declaration, and let's go ahead and paste it in here like so. And go ahead and hit Command A to highlight everything, hit Control I to fix the indentations. And the other thing we want to do is grab the name of this controller, which is register view controller, and update the extension here to have this text field delegate on the register view controller. And all these errors should magically disappear like so. So if you hit Command R, our login screen should now be able to show the alert when we hit this because there's no text in here. And when we start typing here and we hit this key to continue, the return key, it should automatically go to the password field. And when we hit this, nothing actually happens because we're not logging the user in. And if we hit register, we actually get the registration screen, which looks the exact same because we copy and pasted everything. But maybe we should have a first name, a last name field. And what we're also going to do is allow the user to add their profile picture. So this will change to include a tap gesture recognizer. So let's go ahead and go back to the login controller and fix up one thing in here. Once the user hits the button to continue, if all of the validation is correct, we can dismiss the keyboard, or we can dismiss the keyboard as soon as they hit that button. So if the keyboard is focused on the email field, we can call resign first responder on the email field. And similarly, we can call it on the password field, and that will get rid of the keyboard. So this video has gotten pretty long, so let's get through the register screen fairly quick. So let's also paste that in here to get rid of the keyboard for both fields. Let's go ahead and copy and paste the email field 2 times. So now we're going to have a first name field change. Whoops, I think I copied and pasted the password field. So let's hit Command Z to undo. And let's see, we have this button. We have password here, we have the button, and we have password again. So we only want one password. So get rid of that and copy the email field. So actually, I'll call this out because I make this mistake myself. Be very careful about copying and pasting. It's very easy to break things, and I mess it up myself as well. So first name field, first name, last name field, last name, and let's go ahead and add these to our scroll view. So we want first name field, last name field. What I'm also going to do is on the button, instead of login, we're going to change the text to be register. We're going to change the background color to be system. Let's close my pop-up, my antivirus pop-up. Change the background color to be system green. And we also want to change the layout. So we are laying out this email field here. Go ahead and copy and paste it twice. Highlight and hit Control I to fix indentation. Change this to be first name, last name. You want the last name field to be below the first name field. So change the Y on here. And we want the email field to be below the last name field. So change the Y on this. And you want the password field to be below the email field, which it is already. And we have this as login button. So if you click on this and highlight, hit Command F and paste it, you'll notice we use it in a few places. So we can actually change this to be replace. And we're going to find and replace this to be register button. And come on over here to the right and hit all. And it will find and replace that word everywhere in the file. So go ahead and hit Command R to build and run. We should compile successfully. If you hit this, we'll now have a similarly looking first name, last name, email, password sign up form. So you can see an issue that we have already is that our keyboard overlaps the bottom fields. So we're going to be addressing that as we build out this form to have functionality. But before we wrap up this video, let's do 2 more small things. The first thing is let's extend our validation check here, because now we want to make sure we have an email we have a first name, and we also want to make sure we have a last name. So we'll say last name field. We also want to get rid of the keyboard on the first name field and last name field. And let's see, we also want to make sure that the first name and last name are not empty strings. So copy and paste that. Change that to be first name, last name. And if any of this doesn't pass the validation, we want to change up the alert contents here. So we're going to say, please enter all information to log in. This is going to change into please enter all information to create a new account. So you might be thinking there's some other validation we should probably do, like if this email is in use already. And to do that, we need to actually attempt to create a user or interact with Firebase. So we're going to do all that in a follow-up, like I mentioned. And the very last thing before we commit this code via Git is we are going to add a gesture recognizer to this image view. So this image view, the user will be able to tap on it and change the profile picture. So we're going to say image view, add gesture recognizer, gesture, and we're going to say let gesture is a UI tap gesture recognizer. Open the parentheses. Target is self. Action will be a selector. Did tap change profile pic. And make this a function down below. Like so. And we also want to say number of touches required is 1, and number of taps required is also 1. And let's see, if we hit Command B to build and run, looks like we have errors on this line. Let's see, number of taps required equals 1. I think we only need number of touches, so let's get rid of that one. And we still have an error. Why do we still have an error? Let's see. Image view, add gesture. Let's also get rid of this. Hit Command B. Interesting. So it looks like these are get only properties now. They used to be settable, so let's just get rid of that. And I'm just going to put a print in here to make sure this function is being called. And I'll probably not edit out any of these mistakes I make. I think it's pretty useful when learning how to build this stuff and practical code writing. But the other thing I do want to do is instead of using the logo image up here, we are going to use a system image. And the system image will be, I think it's called head, which is like a person's silhouette. And we're going to say the tint color is, let's call it just gray for now. Hit Command R to build and run. Hit register. And we don't have an image, so that's not what we want. Let's see if it's called person. I could have swore the system images included a head. There we go. So they called it person, and I think it should be called head, but whatever. So when we click on this, we see that we're not getting any print statement down below. And the reason I think we're not getting it is because we need to enable interaction on this image view and the scroll view. So let's come in here and say this .is user interaction enabled is true. And we're also going to do the same thing for the scroll view and hit Command R one more time. And if it still gives us issues, we'll just change this to be a button. But in fact, it does not. Now we see that the gesture recognizer is picking up our tap on here. So we are good to go. Now we have our login and register forms created in the user interface. And if we actually change up this simulator in here, make sure it works on other devices, and hit Command R. And let that simulator load. There it goes. We should see that the user interface lays out properly across all these devices. So the reason I did it via code is because we can customize things and learn the nitty gritty a little better. You're very much so welcome to create this in Storyboard and follow along. Some of the things you have to do via code, like the delegate for the field and all that jazz. So hopefully this decides to load and we can wrap up the video. From in the future videos in this series, we're going to look at integrating Facebook login, Google login, so the user doesn't have to explicitly sign up. And we will, of course, link it up with Firebase to get our backend up and running. So this simulator really wants to take its time, but there we go. We have our login screen here. And of course, we can type in our email, and we can also type in a password. If we hit this, nothing happens. We can, of course, go to this screen. When we tap this, we can see in our console over here, we're getting our print statement. We're going to set up a way for the user to either take a picture or for the user to select a pre-made avatar or a picture from their device. And that'll, again, be a different video. And we've got our form here with some basic validation. So that said, this video has gone super long, way more than I anticipated. Thanks so much for watching. If you haven't hit that like button down below, make sure to absolutely destroy it for the YouTube algorithm. Subscribe if you're new, if you're following along, and I'll catch you in part 3.